author of the Planet Hillary piece on the cover of this week's New York Times Magazine. Thank you so much for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
And now live to the Senate floor, where senators are returning from a week-long break. Lawmakers will work today on flood insurance legislation, possibly work on the Farm Bill. And now live to the Senate floor.
And do your will. When they go through difficult seasons, may they remember that a bountiful harvest is certain if they persevere with integrity. Lord, give them a faith that will trust you even when the darkness is blacker than 1,000 midnights. May they always find strength in your providential leading. We pray in your strong name. Amen.
Please join me in reciting the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. The clerk will read a communication to the Senate.
Washington, D.C., January 27, 2014, to the Senate. On the provisions of Rule 1, Paragraph 3 of the Standing Rules of the Senate, I hereby appoint the Honorable Christopher Murphy, a senator from the state of Connecticut, to perform the duties of the chair. Signed, Patrick J. Leahy, President Pro Tempore.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I move to proceed to calendar number 294.
The clerk will report.
Motion to proceed to calendar number 294, S. 1926, a bill to delay the implementation of certain provisions of the Bickert-Waters Flood Insurance Reform Act of 2012 and to reform the National Association of Registered Agents and Brokers and for other purposes.
Mr. President, 5:30 today there will be a roll call vote on the motion to vote cloture on the motion to proceed with the flood insurance bill. I'm told that S. 1950 is at the desk due for a second reading.
The clerk will read the title of the bill for the second time.
1950, a bill to improve the provision of medical services and benefits to veterans and for other purposes.
I would object to any further proceedings with respect to this bill at this time.
Objection having been heard, the bill will be placed on the calendar.
Mr. President, as I announced earlier today, the Senate will vote at 5:30 to advance legislation that will protect millions of homeowners and small businesses from drastic increases in flood insurance premiums. This bipartisan measure will save many homeowners thousands and thousands of dollars a year and protect America's recovering housing market. Since higher premiums would kick in whenever a home is sold, still struggling housing markets across the country could stumble if Congress allows flood insurance rates to skyrocket. And that will happen unless we move this legislation. The bill before the Senate will preserve current rates until the Federal Emergency Management Agency submits a plan to keep premiums reasonable and provide stability at home for business owners. I want to thank Senators Menendez and Landrieu, as well as Senator Isaacson, for their leadership on this issue. Their bill will cut through the red tape and give consumers better, cheaper options when they shop for insurance. So I hope the Senate can wrap work up very quickly on this measure. We've tried for weeks to get an agreement to move forward on it, but we're never quite there. Always, Mr. President, need a little more time. That time has run out. Homeowners deserve certainty, and the Senate faces a substantial workload over the next 3 weeks. On tomorrow, President Obama will address Congress and the nation in the annual State of the Union address. I, like the American people, look forward to hearing the President's vision to create an economy in which the middle class grows and prospers, because every individual should have a fair shot at success. The Senate must also consider a number of critical national security and judicial nominations in the coming weeks. Excuse me. With the help of my Republican colleagues, we could process these nominations swiftly and painlessly without late nights or weekend votes. But as always, we'll depend upon the level of cooperation we receive from the Republicans. This work period, the Senate will also consider a farm conference report. This legislation is a compromise reached thanks to the leadership of Chairwoman Stabenow, and it will reduce the deficit and cut waste and fraud, all while protecting hungry children and families. The Senate will also debate legislation to effectively prevent and punish sexual assault in the nation's armed forces. We have competing views of this. Senator McCaskill and Senator Gillibrand. The Democrats will continue our fight to restore benefits to 1.6 million Americans looking for work during difficult economic times. In the last 2 weeks, since Republicans filibustered a bill to restore this important lifeline, an additional 150,000 Americans have lost their emergency unemployment benefits. For many families already suffering through hard times, loss of $300 a week has meant going without food, turning down the heat on freezing days, or staring down homelessness. One Nevada woman, a Vietnam veteran in her 60s, who's worked all her life and raised a family, said she's afraid she'll end up on the streets of Washington if it doesn't restore her emergency benefits. This is what she wrote to me, and I quote, "It's not that I don't want to work. It's that I'm unable to procure a job. I do feel that it might be my age, but I'm more energetic than some young people I know. Please continue to work to get this passed, as I'm fearful that I will end up homeless." Close quote. Her situation is not unique. Nationwide, thousands and thousands of veterans are looking for work. They've been kicked off the unemployment rolls. And in Nevada, where unemployment is still almost 9%, 21,000 people struggling to find jobs have been cut off from these benefits. In fact, unemployment actually ticked up slightly in Las Vegas last month. And as long as there are 3 job seekers for every available position, we owe it to Americans to lend a helping hand during this emergency. Would the chair announce the business of the day?
Under the previous order, the leadership time is reserved. Under the previous order, the Senate will resume consideration of the motion to proceed to S. 1926.
I would note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander. Ms. Ayotte.
This morning to talk about another very important piece of legislation that we do have very deep and very genuine bipartisan support for, and that is the flood insurance provisions, the Homeowner Affordability Act, which will correct some of the more egregious provisions of a bill that passed a year and a half ago called Biggert Waters. The bill, Biggert Waters, that was passed, named for the two members of the House that led that effort, were well-intentioned. In fact, I've had many wonderful conversations with Maxine Waters, the absolutely distinguished congresswoman from California, whose name carries that bill. And she had wonderful intentions because California, like Louisiana, depends on a program to work that's sustainable, that's affordable. But she even recognized and has been so gracious in her time to come to Louisiana and say, you know, we intended for this to fix the problem, but I will admit we made it worse. And the way that FEMA has interpreted some of the things that we've done have made it worse, and the fact that the federal government continues, despite our efforts, to recognize levees that people have built. So she has agreed to help lead our effort to reform a bill that she and Congresswoman Judy Biggert passed a year and a half ago. So I want to start by commending the leadership. In the House, the leadership is being led by Congresswoman Waters and Congressman Grimm, and there are chairmen of standing committees that are working with them as we speak to figure out how to move forward in the House. But in the Senate, we have been working so well together, despite all of the commotion and adversarial positions on other issues. We've put together a very excellent coalition of about 200 organizations, and I'm going to read those names in just a minute, 200 organizations that have been working with us to fashion a reform bill that meets these objectives. And Madam President, you have spoken on the floor of the Senate now at least a half a dozen times that I have listened to you speak on the floor, so you know all this that I'm going to say because you said it even better than I can. But the provisions that are in our reform bill for flood insurance meet important goals. First of all, it's affordable to the middle-class people that are required to have it. That's the most important thing about flood insurance, is that it be affordable to the people required to have it. Yes, there are some very wealthy families that live in mansions on beaches that are required to have it. They will have no problem paying a substantial premium. But there are millions of middle-class families, many of them in Louisiana, that don't live anywhere near the water, and they most certainly do not live in mansions on the beach. They live in middle-class, blue-collar, working neighborhoods far from lakes, you know, a distance from rivers and nowhere near the ocean, that have found themselves caught up in paying premiums that they can't afford. So if we don't fix this, the premiums coming into the program will be less and less. People will be defaulting on homes. Banks, communities will take a downward economic spiral, and the program itself will collapse. Now, we can't have this program collapse. So even though our critics say, and this has been in the newspapers, they say that we're trying to saddle taxpayers with a huge debt, nothing could be further from the truth. We're trying to save taxpayers from a big bailout by reforming a program that needs to be reformed and fixed so that middle-class people can afford it, Banks can operate well with it. Home builders can build homes with it. Realtors can sell the homes with the program, which they aren't able to do now. Everyone can get back to work. Anxiety can be reduced and give us some time to figure out how to reach those two important goals. So the taxpayers don't have to bail us out and homeowners and businesses can afford it. Is that too much to ask? I don't think so. And happily, Senator Menendez and Senator Isaacson, two really veteran leaders of the Senate, have put a very good bill together, and we are ready to vote. We're ready to vote, Madam President. We could vote actually right now if we could just get a few things worked out. And I'd like to talk about what those few things are publicly so that people can start working them out. Because I think the more things that are transparent around here, the better we all are, and things that are done in secret, it's usually problematic. So let me say from the many people following this that the base bill is still basically in the order that everyone understands it to be. It's printed, it's been visible, public for weeks now. That bill that is the basic essence of the compromises worked out by Senator Menendez and Senator Isaacson, and I might say with Senator Merkley's extraordinary leadership as a subcommittee chair. That is the base bill. There are amendments that people want to offer. Happily, they're all related to flood. And to my knowledge, and Senator Isaacson has worked through this as I have and Senator Menendez, there's a Hagan provision about escrow requirements that we think we should vote on, and we're not sure how that vote will turn out, but we're happy to vote on it. There is a blunt amendment that the National Home Builders have suggested that we have an amendment on, and we could vote on that as well. There is a CRAPO amendment that's in the works. Some of these amendments have been filed and have language. Some of them are just in theory form. There's a CRAPO amendment that would adjust the rate increases in the underlying bill. We could vote on that. There's a Reed amendment from Rhode Island. This would require FEMA to conduct a study on the viability of offering community-based flood insurance policies. My notes say there's broad support for that. There's a Colburn amendment, which is an alternative to the NARAB. That amendment will probably not receive the votes required, but we're happy to talk about his amendment and have him offer it. And there is a Merkley amendment that will subject NFIB policyholders to be forced to place insurance policies or let their policies lapse. It's a technical amendment. And there's also a Rubio-Nelson amendment that's being discussed. Now, those are the only amendments that we know about. So if there's anybody else that has an amendment on flood that would like to offer it or have it considered, the next couple hours would be the last opportunity to get those amendments in. Now, I know everybody's busy. Everybody's got lots to do. I've cleared my calendar. I had meetings, cleared the calendar to do this today because it's very important that we not just get so busy with other things that we leave this place and not get this done. So we're working transparently, openly, so there are no games to be played by either side here. So again, I want to repeat, there's a Hagan amendment pending, not pending, but that we know of, a Rubio-Nelson, a Reed of Rhode Island, a Colburn, a Merkley, a Blunt, and then Toomey, who was just on the floor, the senator from Pennsylvania, has indicated that he wants to offer a substitute to what we're proposing. I'm not the manager of this bill, so it is not my authority to make these definitive statements. Senator Menendez and Senator Isaacson will ultimately decide the strategy. But as far as I understand, because we've all been working very hard together to move this bill to final passage here, As far as I understand, these are the only amendments that people would like to offer, and there doesn't seem to be any objection to offering them. In addition, if people want 51 votes or if they want 60 votes, we're very open to that as well. And we could pass the bill with 51 votes. We can pass the bill with 60 votes. So we're open, you know, because that's the game that's played here. You say, well, we want 60. No, we want 51 or 51 and 60. We can take it in any arithmetic anybody wants to give us. You want us 51 votes, we will deliver them. You want 60 votes, we can deliver 60 votes. Because we've done the homework on this bill, working with coalitions, working with homeowners and businesses from South Dakota, North Dakota, to New Jersey and New York, to Mississippi, Louisiana, and California and Oregon. There is no disagreement. Well, there's some disagreement, but there's not enough disagreement to overcome the great coalition that has been put together here, which was evidenced by an extraordinary press conference just a couple of days ago where we had over, you know, almost 20 senators showed up, or their staffs were represented, saying we're ready to go. So my message on the floor today, and if I have, I don't know how many more minutes I have.
Senator's used 12 minutes.
Senator has used 12 minutes.
Okay, I'd like another 5, unanimous consent.
Without objection.
Okay. What was evidenced earlier, and the coalition knows this, is that there's broad consensus. There are a few senators that want to vote against this bill. There are a few senators that want to offer amendments. Fine. Let the record show these amendments could be offered. These amendments, germane to this bill, and any that would come to us, you know, in the next, you know, hour or so that are germane to this bill, we can take these amendments and have a 51 vote, a 60 requirement vote, and final passage on 51 or 60. Let's just get this done. And there should be no confusion at all about this. And I'm glad that no one on the opposite side is here debating me on this. That's a good sign for us that there really is only one side to this story, and this is the side. I'm trying to be as fair as I can. I have named the people who have amendments to our knowledge. We, the Democrats, have said we have no objection to you offering those amendments. If you want 51 votes, if you want 60 votes, just let us know. I feel confident that our coalition can hold against any amendments that would try to gut this bill. And we will let people know what those amendments are and who's offered them. Because we think that this is absolutely the right thing to do for the country, for our states that we're representing, and for the taxpayer. And just give us a little time to work together to figure out how to strengthen the National Flood Insurance Program without bankrupting 5 million families. Because if we don't stop this train that has already left the station, we have to stop it, reverse it, and put it back in the train barn. And it is going down the track pretty fast. This is not a good place to be. As I said, we probably should never have passed this bill, but it was put in a conference committee report that was unamendable. And some provisions of it were indecipherable at the time. That's a little strong of a word, but they were not understood. Not indecipherable, but they were not well understood. As the bill got read and implemented, people started realizing, oh my gosh, what have we done? This is not going to work. And they are right. So I'm going to stay on the floor this morning. If anyone from the Republican side wants to come down, anyone, and disagree with what I've presented or challenge what I've presented, please do, because I want this to be a very open process. There's nothing for us to hide from. And that's what a democracy is about. There's some people that want to vote against our bill. Fine, go ahead and vote against it. But we have the votes to pass it. We have 60, as I said. We may even have more than 60. And if we don't, then all I can say is we've tried our level best, and we just don't have the votes to correct it. I don't think that's the case. So I am not going to allow the smoke that's around here and the confusion and all the hot air to confuse the coalition that's worked too hard. And they need to hear my voice very clearly, which is why I'm here. There is clarity. There is no opposition on the Democratic side to this bill. We are waiting for a few clarifications from the Republican side. We hope to get those, and the Democrats that do have amendments, the only Democrats that have amendments that I know of are Senator Hagan, Senator Reid from Rhode Island, and Senator Merkley. We have no objection on the Democratic side for this bill, and only 3 members that have amendments, and we're happy to have a vote on those amendments. They're not really controversial. Somebody might find a problem with them and might vote no, fine, but they don't gut the bill. There's no problem with the bill. It's the Republican side that we're waiting for clarity. And again, I know how busy everyone is. I know the senator from Pennsylvania is working very hard on he was just here speaking about it, on the unemployment insurance, and I know that's a very, very important issue to the people that he represents and to Louisiana. If he could get a little time to work on this amendment that we think he wants to offer on flood whenever he can, we're happy to have his amendment. We will vote on it. Menendez and Isaacson will decide on when and how and what the number is, 51 or 60, but I believe, let me just speak for myself, that it doesn't matter. We have the votes to not allow, if his intention is to gut the bill will not be gutted. If his intention is to help us strengthen the bill, then that is a definite possibility. But people are desperate to get an answer from Congress now. We should have done this 4 months ago before these rate increases. Escrow accounts are being collected now from people that got bills that they were paying $500 a year. Now they're paying $5,000. According to the Bigger Waters law, the banks have to go get that $5,000 and put it in the bank now to pay that insurance. That is a real hardship on people. We need to stop that, figure this out, and I'll finally add, I'm going to ask for another 1 minute. I think I've extended my time already. Another 1 minute. Thank you. We've delayed this fix too long, and we need to go ahead and take care of this. So I'm going to stay on the floor this morning. I'll periodically bring everyone up to date. Let me just close with reminding people, let me do the dot map, with reminding people what we are talking about. These are the new flood maps in the United States that are either in effect, purple, proposed in green, and new flood maps in yellow. There is not a state that is exempt from what I'm speaking about. And the amazing thing is to see this cluster in Pennsylvania and in New York and in Ohio. I mean, everyone thinks about this as a Texas or Florida or Louisiana issue. But when you see the inland states as well being affected by flood maps that have never been issued before or being issued without good data, because FEMA doesn't have the science or technology or resources to do this correctly yet. The affordability study has not even been done, and they just didn't do it, even though the last bill asked them to. So we need to put this train back in the station. It is not ready for prime time. And then bring it out in a way that, yes, rates may have to rise.
That proceedings under the quorum be vitiated.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I also ask unanimous consent that I be permitted to speak for up to 15 minutes as if in morning business.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, 50 years ago, on January 27, 1964, Senator Margaret J. Smith of Maine announced her candidacy for President of the United States. The following July, at the Republican National Convention in San Francisco, the great lady from Maine became the first woman in history to have her name entered into nomination by a major party for our nation's highest office. I rise to commemorate this remarkable leader and this significant milestone in our history. At the time of her announcement, Senator Smith was in her 24th year in Congress and was an established groundbreaker. She was the first woman elected to both the House and the Senate, and the first to serve on the Armed Services Committee. She was the woman who gave other women the opportunity to pursue careers in the military. Due to her early and energetic support for the space program, she has been called the woman who put a man on the moon. Her courageous declaration of conscience delivered in the Senate on June 1st, 1950, turned the tide against McCarthyism and reminded all Americans of our nation's core values of free expression and independent thought. Mr. President, Senator Smith made her presidential announcement in a speech at the Women's National Press Club in Washington. Yes, Mr. President, there was a separate press club for women in those days. It was an important address in which she described both the progress that America had made against bigotry, prejudice, extremism, and hatred, as well as the challenges that remained. But Margaret Chase Smith saved the best for last. After telling her audience of the flood of letters that she'd been receiving from all over the country urging her to run for president, Senator Smith described the reasons offered by her supporters, such as she had more experience at the national level than any of the other confirmed candidates. She had the stature that could break the barrier against women being seriously considered for president. She would provide a moderate, middle-of-the-road option in an election that was shaping up as one between a very conservative and very liberal philosophy. Then she described the reasons that she should not run, the widespread contention that the presidency was a man's job, her lack of financial resources and a professional political organization, and the fact that the odds were stacked heavily against her. Senator Smith said that she found the reasons offered against running far more compelling than those in favor. So imagine the surprise of her audience when she said that because of those very reasons, she had decided to enter the New Hampshire primary. Senator Smith's campaign was off and running, and what a campaign it was. Senator Smith accepted no money from anyone. All contributions, whether they were large or small, were returned to sender. She took to the campaign trail only when the Senate was not in session in order to preserve her perfect record of never missing a roll call vote and to keep the pledge of dedicated service she had made to the people of Maine. Her campaign motto was, "There is nothing more effective than a handshake and a little conversation." As a consequence of her self-imposed financial and time restraints, Senator Smith did not win a primary. But in the one primary where she was able to campaign somewhat extensively, the state of Illinois, for all of 2 weekends and a total expenditure of $85, she finished a strong second in a field of 6. She lost only to the eventual nominee, Barry Goldwater. With 25% of the vote, she came in far ahead of such well-known candidates as Richard Nixon, Nelson Rockefeller, and Henry Cabot Lodge. It is intriguing to think what she might have done with a more traditional campaign. At the Republican National Convention in San Francisco that year, Senator Smith's name was entered into nomination by Senator George Aiken of Vermont. He told the delegates that Senator Smith's integrity, ability, common sense, and courage made her the best qualified person you ever voted for. On the first ballot, 27 delegates did vote for Margaret Chase Smith from the great state of Maine. Unlike the other candidates, Senator Smith did not release her delegates to the landslide victor, Senator Goldwater. That was not done out of spite. Indeed, she campaigned earnestly for him in the general election. It was done because she wanted to demonstrate, she wanted the historical record to show that a woman had been given serious consideration for the presidency of this country. Mr. President, many words have been spoken over many years in attempts to describe the character of Senator Margaret Chase Smith. Perhaps the best were offered by the candidate herself on that campaign trail a half-century ago. She said, "I have few illusions and no money, but I'm staying for the finish. When people keep telling you you can't do a thing, you kind of want to try." Mr. President, on this milestone anniversary, I'm honored to celebrate an extraordinary woman from Maine who tried and failed in one endeavor, but in doing so inspired generations of Americans with her strength and determination, and demonstrated, as she once said, that a woman's place is everywhere. Today, Mr. President, the Senate has a record 20 women senators. In a sense, each of us owes a debt to Senator Margaret Chase Smith, but none more so than I. You see, I first met Senator Smith when I was a high school senior from Caribou, Maine. I was selected as one of 2 students to come to Washington as part of the Senate Youth Program sponsored by the William Randolph Hearst Foundation, a program that still exists today. I remember how excited I was to see Senator Smith and her graciousness in inviting her into her office and spending nearly 2 hours with me. As the presiding officer can appreciate, for any of us to spend 2 hours with anyone is remarkable nowadays. But Margaret Chase Smith carved out that time to talk with me. And recently her library sent me copies of her appointment book for that day, so that I could see that my appointment with her was listed and preserved for all time. She talked to me not about what it was like being the only woman in the Senate. She talked to me instead about her service on the Armed Services Committee, about what we could do to create more jobs in this country, and most of all, about her famous Declaration of Conscience, in which she stood up against the smear campaign and the excesses of Senator Joseph McCarthy. Through that speech, she taught us all to stand tall for what we believe in and to speak out against injustice and bigotry. I remember, Mr. President, when I left her office, I was so thrilled and inspired. And I remember thinking that women could do anything. Now, this was back in 1971. And although I came from a family with wonderful role models in both my mother and my father, who were so active in their community and in their state, there were a lot of other messages about that time that raised doubts in the minds of girls growing up about whether we could, in fact, be whatever we wanted to be. So that message that I learned from Margaret Chase Smith was so important in shaping who I am today. And although I did not know it at the time at all, that meeting with Margaret Chase Smith, shortly after I had turned 18 as a high school senior, taught me that I could achieve my dream. And in many ways, it was the first step on a journey that led me to run for her seat in the United States Senate 25 years later. And today, I am so proud that the desk at which I stand, the desk that I use and it's assigned to me on the Senate floor, once belonged to the legendary senator from Maine, Margaret Chase Smith. What a wonderful role model she was to me the entire time I was growing up, when she was representing the state of Maine with such integrity, skill, and courage, and how fortunate I feel to hold her seat in the United States Senate. So today, it gives me great pride as well as great pleasure to inform my colleagues that this is the 50th anniversary of the day that Senator Margaret Chase Smith of Maine became the first woman in history to announce her candidacy for President of the United States, and later that year to be the first woman to have her name placed in nomination by a major political party. Let us celebrate this day, Mr. President, as we also celebrate the presence of a record number of women in the United States Senate. I believe that would have made Senator Smith very proud. Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I would suggest the absence of a quorum, and I yield the floor.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.
Our guest for this segment is Rebecca Adams, Associate Editor at CQ Health Beat. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Thanks for having me.
So one of the big benchmarks of the Affordable Care Act has been the role of young people. Tell us what you're seeing so far.
Well, on January 13th, the administration put out the first demographic breakdown of what the enrollments look like. And so what we're seeing in that is that the administration and others have targeted that 40% of the sign-ups would be among young people, people 18 to 34. But that's not happening so far. So far, what we're seeing is about 24% of the people who are signing up are young people. Now, that's in proportion to the population. About 26% of the population is young people. But because we're really looking for young and healthy people, then that means that the administration has a lot of ground to make up in the next couple of months before open enrollment ends on March 31st.
So taking a look at those numbers, with that obviously being lower than that 40% benchmark the administration has set, what does that mean? And explain to me how that will impact the law's implementation overall.
Sure. So the reason why people really are looking for young people is it's really a proxy for health. And the administration wants more people signing up for care than will need care. If you have a lot of 55-year-olds, which we are seeing sign up, then they'll be using their health care quite a bit. They'll have pretty high expenses. And you need the younger people, the healthier people, to subsidize those costs. And so there's a concern, or there has been a concern, that insurance companies might actually raise their premiums next year to make up for any losses that they might have this year.
Sure, you mentioned the last data we had on demographics came around January 13th. When can we expect to see an updated number?
Well, they do it every month. And so we'll expect to see it coming out soon when the next month comes out. And then we did see on Friday that they put out just a little bit of information. They told us that 3 million people now have signed up for marketplace plans, but they didn't break it down for us. So we don't know whether there's an increase in the number of young people who are signing up or not.
Again, our guest for this hour is Rebecca Adams. She's an Associate Editor at CQ Health Beat. We'd love to have you join the conversation. If you're between the ages of 18 to 34, we want to hear from you at 202-585-3880. Between the ages of 35 to 49, 202-585-3881. And if you are 50 and older, you can call in at 202-585-3882. Of course, can also reach out to us on Twitter at CSPANWJ or on Facebook or email. What efforts, Rebecca, has the administration made to reach out to young people in order to meet that 40% benchmark that they've set?
The administration is doing everything that it can to get young people out. First, they have an overall budget of $76 million for paid advertising, and that's not just for young people, that's for everybody, but they really are trying to gear that towards young people. That's for the 6-month open enrollment period. And they are advertising during the upcoming Winter Olympics, which a lot of people will be watching. They are enlisting celebrities to go out there and tweet about it and talk about it. They have some paid ads with some basketball legends, Magic Johnson and Alonzo Mourning. Those came out recently. They're highlighting these videos on the internet website, funnyordie.com. There's a new video out with that. And so they're really trying to convince people that this is something that they need, that this is protection that can help them. And they're trying to explain how the market has changed quite a bit since the Affordable Care Act took place.
All right, let's go to the phone lines now. Our first call comes from Sierra Vista, Arizona. Anthony is on the line.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm calling because the Affordable Care Act has allowed my son, who's in college, to get a policy, as we all know, that until age 26, I believe. And, you know, he's spending a little time in college, but it ended up the policy on the Affordable Care didn't cover more things than the university policy covered. And the significance of it to me is I have 2 children, and one's married, just had a 3rd child. She's paying $1,500 deductible for that 3rd child through her husband's insurance policy. Now, to wrap it all up, I grew up in a family of single parents, 7 children. We were on welfare, so, you know, associated with that was limited health care. And it is so critical that we all understand health care is more than just the dollar spent. It's a lifetime of how your lifestyle is going to end up. And I'm at 54 now. I'm going to try to, live another 20 or 30 years, but I've got some serious health problems, and early intervention would have made a key decision in how my life would have been later. But I've been able to get on top of it. But overall, I have definitely stressed to my children, my married daughter, and my son in college, you got to have health care. And when I left the military, I spent $600 a month to make sure I had some coverage until I could get a job that provided coverage.
The caller brings up a lot of interesting points. First, there is a very strong belief among policymakers that preventive care does improve health outcomes. And so that's one of the reasons why the Affordable Care Act does require health insurers to cover preventive services for people. And hopefully people will be able to take advantage of that. Hopefully that will help improve health outcomes among different demographic groups and among the population as a whole. He did mention that that his son was able to stay on his insurance policy until he was 26 years old. That was one of the first things that took effect that happened with the Affordable Care Act. That happened about 6 months after the law passed in March 2010. So people now, about 3 million young adults have been able to stay on their parents' health insurance policies. That's made a big difference. And now people can also go to the marketplace at healthcare.gov or at the website run by their states to check out and see whether the coverage that's available there would also be helpful to them. A lot of them are going to be eligible for subsidies as well if they're a lower income.
I'll ask you a question about that marketplace and look at this chart from the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services. They say that during December there was a more than 8-fold increase in the cumulative number of young adults, so those between the ages of 18 to 34, that selected a marketplace plan through the federally facilitated marketplace. Kind of explain to us what exactly that means in English.
Sure. So what they're saying, they're trying to make the point that there was a surge in December and that the number of young people who signed up grew more than the number of people who signed up in general. There was an 8-fold increase among young people. There was a 5-fold increase among the population as a whole. So they see that as generating additional interest among young people. But you have to remember we're starting from a very low starting point, and on the first day that healthcare.gov was operating, only 6 people were able to sign up. So it was from a low starting point, but they believe that as the March 31st deadline approaches, more and more young people are going to show some interest and try to go and sign up for these plans. They believe that older people, sicker people, people who are very motivated to get those benefits as soon as they started on January 1st, they were the first ones to sign up. And they think that as time goes on, more and more young people will show some interest.
Our next call comes from Vestaburg, Michigan. Steve is 44.
Vestaburg, Michigan.
Go ahead.
Hi.
Good morning.
How you doing?
We're great. Go ahead. You're on Washington Journal.
Oh, I'm just calling in today to voice my opinion on how many people suffer right now over this Obamacare. I mean, where's the freedom of choice?
Freedom of choice. So he's probably bringing up the issue of the individual mandate. The law does say that most Americans need to buy insurance this year, and the penalty if you don't do that is $95 or 1% of your income, whichever is more. So this was something that was litigated before the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court upheld this as a tax. And you can get exemptions. There are a long list of exemptions, including if you can't find affordable insurance. But there is a provision in the law that requires people to buy insurance this year.
All right. Let's take another call now from Greenville, Kentucky. Peter, who's 26.
Good morning. Good morning, Rebecca.
Good morning.
My question is concerning the 20-something% of 18 to 38-year-olds that signed up. Is there going to be any other kind of like marketing mechanisms to try to get us to sign up other than via online online. And one other question. When I signed up, I was given a notice letter saying that I needed to mail in my prison release records. What was the purpose of that? I'll take my call off the air. Thank you.
I don't know about the prison release records. If you have not been in prison, it's possible there was just a mistake there. I wanted to mention that there are call centers that people can call into if they have trouble enrolling online, and that people can also go to in-person centers where they can get some in-person help. And that's been very important when we saw these technical problems with healthcare.gov. Certainly there were a lot of people who were getting help from navigators and counselors who can walk them through the process. You can also go online to other websites besides healthcare.gov. You can go to eHealth Insurance or any of the online brokers, or you can talk to a regular broker to try to see if they can help you sign up for health insurance.
So if I'm like...
Mr. President, the immigration issue that the country is wrestling with is broad and deep and has huge ramifications in a host of areas. But one area that has just been ignored systematically, it seems to me, at least to a degree that is unacceptable, is the impact a massive increase in immigration to America will have on the already declining wages and job prospects of Americans who are hurting today. That's just a fact that needs to be discussed. We need to be honest about it. Prime Minister David Cameron in United Kingdom has announced major reductions in immigration, said there may be more. And he just said we can't expect that foreign workers would take jobs that we need to be training Britons to do. How simple and valuable a concept is that? So we're talking about legislation that can shift the power, wealth from working people to business people, to corporations, because it will shift, if not done properly. And we believe in immigration. We're not opposed to immigration. It just needs to be done at the level and in the proper way so that our workers are not so adversely impacted as would occur if the Senate bill were to become law, for example. Thank goodness the House is saying they're not going to pass that bill. So the President Obama is preparing to deliver a State of the Union address tomorrow night in which he will address the continued financial collapse of the American middle class, much of which has occurred on his watch. It started before he took office, and since 2000 till today, the average wage of working Americans has declined. As adjusted for inflation, it's negative. And in the last 2 or 3 years, since the recession is supposed to be over and has been announced as over, that decline has accelerated. And Professor Borjas and others have tagged a lot of that result as occurring because of a substantial increase in immigration that's been occurring in America. So if the President wishes to demonstrate a sincere concern for struggling workers, then he must recognize the negative impact his immigration policies are having on wage earners throughout the country right now. According to Harvard professor George Borjas, the nation's leading expert and economist on immigration, himself a Cuban immigrant from Cuba as a young man, Professor Borjas says every dollar of increased profit for companies that use immigrant labor is offset by a dollar in lost wages for Americans competing with that immigrant labor. Think about that. In fact, he scores that a $400 billion benefit for businesses who are lobbying for this bill, they and their political activist allies lobbying for this bill, they definitely receive a financial benefit. He estimates at about $400 billion and a little over $400 billion, and he estimates, based on rigorous data, he's a Harvard trained economist and specializing in immigration. He sees that that is paid for, virtually every dollar of it, by reduced wages of American workers. That's the way, colleagues, the free enterprise system works. You have more cotton in America, the price of cotton goes down. You bring in more labor than we've had before, the price of labor comes down. That's just the way it works. And we have not eliminated the law of supply and demand. The law of supply and demand dictates that an increased supply of workers will result in a reduced cost of hiring workers. The President's push for new federal wage controls is going to have a mandated wage now by the federal government, and extended unemployment jobless benefits is effectively an admission that his policies and what's happening in America have cut wages and reduced the ability of Americans to get jobs. But these measures that he's proposing are really treating the symptoms. Why do we have to have unprecedented unemployment payment benefits? Why? Because we don't have enough jobs in America for the people that are applying for them. That's why. Why do we have to raise the wage by law? Why aren't wages going up as they have throughout most of the history of our country, naturally through the supply and demand? Could it be that we've had, as Professor Borjas says, for the last 30 years, an incredible increase in flow of foreign workers that are competing for these jobs every single year? One cannot return to full employment and rising wages for workers at all skill levels without tightening the labor market. We've got a loose labor market. We've got a surplus of people looking for jobs. Gene Sperling, the President's top advisor on the economy, said just a few weeks ago that we have 3 workers applying for each 1 job that exists in America. Why in the world, then, would we want to bring in and allow businesses to demand increased numbers of low-skilled workers? The present plan will provide companies an incentive to hire even fewer American workers and less likely to hire a person who's been unemployed for a long time, the long-term unemployed. The U.S. has already formally admitted more immigrants, largely lesser skilled, in the last 10 years than any prior 10-year history in 10-year period in America's history. So the question every reporter, pundit, and lawmaker should ask is this: how does the President think it will help Americans trying to climb into the middle class to pass an immigration plan that would double the number of immigrant workers competing against them for jobs and wages? The single largest category in our budget right now is welfare and poverty support programs, helping people who have lower incomes, including state contributions. My budget committee staff has discovered we spend more than $1 trillion on federal means-tested support programs each year. Over $1 trillion. That's twice the defense budget. More than Social Security, more than Medicare. A record 1 in 5 households today receive food stamps in 2013. 1 in 5. The majority of them are working age. That's the first time that's happened. The majority of the recipients on food stamps are within the working age groups. Our urgent national mission is to begin transitioning these struggling workers into good jobs with rising wages. Instead, the President proposes to increase federal spending even more to sustain millions on welfare while increasing the supply and the admission of lower-skilled immigrants to take the available jobs that exist. House leaders are reportedly pushing rushing to assemble a plan that is similar to the President's. I hope not, but that's what's being suggested. This would be the worst thing they could do at such a time. Instead, the Democratic Senate having spoken, the Republican House must stand up, expose the President's disastrous policies, and advocate a new direction that promotes assimilation, rising wages, and a growing middle class for all Americans, including those who've recently immigrated, including Hispanics, including African Americans. So our lower-skilled workers are the ones that are adversely affected the most from increased flows of immigrant labor into the country. And I just hope that we'll consider this and talk honestly about it, because it's not going away. It's a reality. And the suggestion that somehow this won't happen is not so. The Congressional Budget Office, in scoring the Senate bill, concluded that it would pull down wages of Americans for 20 years. The last thing this Senate or any President of the United States should do would be to advocate and promote a policy that will pull down wages. We need to be looking for ways to increase wages. When you're in a hole, first thing you do is stop digging. Don't make it worse. Don't create 4, 5 applicants for every one job that exists in America. So I hope the President will talk about that. I challenge him to talk about it. And I'm going to watch what he says. And I expect him, as President of the United States, addressing a joint session of Congress, to tell the truth and be accurate about his analysis and discussion of this important issue. It's important to America. We believe in immigration, but we want a lawful system of immigration. An immigration system that first and foremost does not damage, hurt, and weaken the financial position of already struggling American workers. Isn't that our first responsibility? We should create this lawful system in a way that serves the long-term interest, the legitimate long-term interest of the United States of America and all the people that are in it, not just a few special ones with big money and special political power. I thank the Chair and would yield the floor and note the absence of a quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Alexander.